The champagne glasses stopped mid-air. Every conversation died. Even the string quartet seemed to sense the shift, their melody trailing into an uncomfortable silence as 16-year-old Maya stepped forward from behind the towering wedding cake, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying across the entire reception hall. She's not who she says she is. The bride radiant in her $1,000 dress, surrounded by white roses and fairy lights, turned slowly, her practiced smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. But Maya caught it. She always caught the things others missed. The micro expression that lasted less than a heartbeat. The way someone's eyes darted left when they were calculating their next lie. The small tells that came from years of watching adults decide whether she was worth keeping. Maya's foster father, David Chun, stood frozen at the altar in his perfectly pressed tuxedo, his hand still extended toward his new bride, as if he could somehow freeze this moment, rewind it, make his wedding day beautiful again. But Maya had learned long ago that some truths couldn't wait for convenient timing. Before we dive deeper into this story, like this video if you believe that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important truths. The wedding planner was already moving, her clipboard clutched like a shield, whispering frantically into her headset. Guests began to murmur, their faces a mixture of confusion and anticipation. But Maya's eyes never left the bride's face, watching as the woman who had spent 6 months convincing everyone, including Maya, that she loved their little broken family more than anything, began to show her true colors. What Maya had discovered 3 days ago, hidden in encrypted files on a laptop carelessly left open, would shatter more than just a wedding. It would expose a carefully constructed lie that had been months in the making, orchestrated by someone who had studied their vulnerabilities like a predator studies prey. The wedding reception program lay scattered across tables like evidence of elaborate fiction. Each glossy page detailed Sarah Elizabeth Morrison's supposed background: beloved daughter of deceased missionaries, former humanitarian aid worker, graduate of Stanford Business School. Every word a calculated lie, every detail crafted to appeal to David's values and Maya's need for stability. "Maya, sweetheart," David's voice cracked as he stepped down from the altar, his face pale but his tone gentle. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her bouquet of white orchids, the only sign of tension in her otherwise composed facade. She had trained for this moment, Maya realized, prepared for the possibility that someone might see through her performance. But she hadn't counted on a traumatized teenager with a gift for pattern recognition and an instinct for survival. "Her name isn't Sarah Morrison," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's Sarah Martinez. And this isn't her first wedding." The gasps from the crowd were audible now, but Maya kept her focus on the woman who had nearly destroyed the only real family she'd ever known. Sarah's blue eyes contact lenses, Maya had discovered, locked onto hers with an intensity that would have terrified most teenagers. But Maya had survived worse predators than this one. David's hand found Maya's shoulder, a gesture of protection that made her heart ache. He still didn't understand. He still wanted to believe in love stories and happy endings. But Maya would protect him, even if it meant destroying his dreams in the process. "I have proof," Maya whispered, pulling out her phone with steady hands. 3 days before the wedding, Maya had been helping David organize his home office for the post-honeymoon period when Sarah would officially move in. The laptop sat open on his mahogany desk, its screen glowing with what looked like financial spreadsheets. David had stepped out to take a call from the caterer, leaving Maya alone with towers of wedding planning documents and the soft hum of the computer. She hadn't meant to look. Privacy was sacred in their household, a rule David had established early in their relationship, understanding that foster children needed boundaries they could control. But something about the screen caught her attention. Numbers that didn't make sense. Transactions that seemed ... wrong. Maya had taught herself coding at 12, spending hours in public libraries while waiting for social workers in court hearings. Technology was predictable in ways that adults weren't. Computers didn't lie about loving you, didn't promise forever, and then disappear in the night. They operated on logic and rules. Systems Maya could understand and master. The spreadsheet showed wire transfers, large ones. Money moving from David's business accounts to offshore holdings she'd never heard him mention. Maya's stomach clenched. with familiar dread, the same feeling she'd gotten right before her last foster placement fell apart. Something was wrong. Her fingers hesitated over the trackpad. David trusted her. He'd given her a home, stability, love without conditions. Looking at his private files would be a violation of everything they'd built together. But the numbers on the screen made no sense. And Maya's survival instincts were screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. David's laptop wasn't password protected. Another sign of trust that now seemed dangerously naive. Maya clicked through the folders with growing unease. Financial records, business documents, and then a folder labeled Wedding Planning that contained more than just venue contracts and vendor receipts. Inside were encrypted files with names like Asset Transfer Protocol and Post-Marriage Investment Strategy. The encryption was sophisticated but not unbreakable, especially for someone who'd spent years learning cybersecurity to protect herself in an uncertain world. Maya's heart raced as she worked to decrypt the first file. She could hear David's voice in the hallway, still on the phone, discussing flower arrangements with oblivious enthusiasm. The irony was crushing. While he planned the happiest day of his life, she was uncovering evidence that it might be based on elaborate deception. The first file cracked open, revealing documents that made Maya's blood run cold. Transfer agreements, asset liquidation plans, a systematic strategy for gaining control of David's cybersecurity. Firm immediately after the marriage was legally finalized. None of it was in David's handwriting. None of it matched his communication style or business philosophy. But all of it required his new wife's signature and legal authority as his spouse. Maya closed the laptop quickly. As David's footsteps approached, her mind racing with implications she didn't want to believe. Sarah Morrison, the woman who brought David coffee every morning and listened to Maya's school problems with patient attention, was planning something that looked exactly like financial fraud. But Maya needed more evidence before she could destroy the man who'd finally given her a home. That night, Maya lay awake staring at her ceiling, while David and Sarah watched romantic comedies downstairs, their laughter drifting up through the floorboards like a mockery of her growing suspicions. At 2 a.m., when the house finally fell silent, she crept back to David's office. The laptop yielded its secrets reluctantly, but Maya had patience born of necessity. Each encrypted file revealed another layer of Sarah's deception, and with each discovery, Maya's last hopes for a simple misunderstanding crumbled into dust. Sarah Morrison's identity was a masterpiece of fabrication. Her Stanford Business School credentials were forgeries, purchased from a sophisticated document mill that specialized in academic credentials. Her humanitarian work in Guatemala had never happened. The organization she claimed to have worked for had no record of anyone matching her description. Even her tragic backstory about losing her parents in a car accident was stolen from an obituary in Nebraska, complete with emotional details that Sarah had memorized and weaponized. But the real revelation came when Maya discovered the encrypted USB drive hidden in a secret partition of the laptop's hard drive. Sarah had been careless or perhaps overconfident leaving behind a digital trail that revealed the true scope of her operation. The USB contained what Maya could only describe as a con artist's playbook, detailed psychological profiles of potential targets, including David, information about his late wife's death, his adoption of Maya, his business success, and emotional vulnerabilities, all compiled with clinical precision. Sarah had studied them like a scientist studying lab specimens, identifying their weaknesses and crafting her approach accordingly. Maya's hands shook as she read the files. Sarah had targeted David specifically because of Maya, a grieving widower with a vulnerable teenager, would be more susceptible to manipulation, more likely to want the stability of a traditional family structure. Maya's own trauma history had been weaponized against the man who'd saved her. The profiles extended beyond David. Other men, other families that Sarah had identified as potential marks. Some were crossed out with notes like insufficient assets or too suspicious. Others had status updates: in progress, funds transferred, target eliminated, target eliminated. Maya felt sick. She found financial records showing a pattern spanning 5 years. Sarah Martinez, her real name, buried in documents she thought no one would ever access, had married and financially destroyed at least 4 men before setting her sights on David. Each operation followed the same template: intensive research, emotional manipulation, quick marriage, asset liquidation, and disappearance. The previous victims had been left with nothing: businesses bankrupted, homes foreclosed, savings accounts emptied. One man had committed suicide. Another had suffered a heart attack during the divorce proceedings that Sarah had strategically initiated after transferring his assets to untraceable offshore accounts. Maya stared at David's profile in Sarah's files, seeing her foster father reduced to data points and vulnerabilities. Target: high net worth, recent trauma. Dependent child provides emotional leverage. Timeline: 6 to 8 months from initial contact to asset transfer completion. The timeline matched perfectly. Sarah had approached David exactly 7 months ago at a coffee shop near his office, engineering a chance encounter that now seemed laughably orchestrated. Every moment of their courtship had been calculated. Every gesture of affection, a strategic move in a game. David didn't even know he was playing. Maya copied everything onto her own encrypted drive, her mind already racing ahead to the impossible task before her: convincing David that the woman he loved was a predator without destroying him in the process. Maya found Mrs. Rodriguez in the kitchen the next morning, preparing David's favorite breakfast, as she had every day for the past 3 years. Elena Rodriguez had been David's housekeeper since before his first wife died, but she'd become something more precious to their small family: a grandmother figure who saw everything and judged nothing. "Mia," Mrs. Rodriguez said without looking up from the stove, "you look like you've seen ghosts." Maya slumped into a chair at the kitchen island, her laptop bag heavy with stolen evidence and impossible truths. Mrs. Rodriguez had an uncanny ability to read people's emotional states, a skill Maya had always envied and now desperately needed. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Maya began carefully, "what do you think of Sarah?" The older woman's hand stilled on the spatula for just a moment, a tell so subtle that only someone like Maya would catch it. "Why do you ask, Nina? Just tell me what you really think, not what you think I want to hear." Mrs. Rodriguez turned off the burner and faced Maya fully, her weathered hands folding over her apron. In her late 60s, she had the kind of face that had seen everything life could offer and still chose kindness. But her dark eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. "She watches too much," Mrs. Rodriguez said finally. "Not the way someone watches because they care, but the way someone watches because they single quotes studying." Maya's heart leaped. "You've noticed it too? See, she asks questions that seem innocent but aren't. About Mr. David's business, about the house, about you. Always smiling, always sweet, but—" Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "There's something cold underneath." Maya pulled out her laptop, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the files she'd copied. "What if I told you she's not who she says she is?" Mrs. Rodriguez sat down heavily, her expression growing grave as Maya showed her the evidence. The forged credentials, the financial plans, the profiles of previous victims. As the revelations mounted, Mrs. Rodriguez's face hardened with a protective fury that Maya had only seen once before, when a social worker had suggested that David might be too inexperienced to handle a traumatized teenager. "Dios mío," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, crossing herself. "This woman, she's a devil." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Sarah's deception settling between them like a toxic cloud. From upstairs came the sound of David singing in the shower, blissfully unaware that his world was about to collapse. "He won't believe." "U.S.," Maya said quietly. "He loves her." Mrs. Rodriguez reached across the table and took Maya's hands in her own, calloused from decades of work, but gentle in their strength. "Mr. David loves the woman he thinks she is, but love built on lies isn't love at all, it's addiction. How do we make him see?" "Carefully, Mia, very carefully. Men like Mr. David, they need to discover the truth themselves, or they'll spend forever defending the lie." Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed Maya's hands. "But we'll help him see. We'll protect our family." Maya looked at the photo album on the counter, filled with pictures from her first Christmas with David. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. They had 48 hours to save the only home she'd ever known. While David spent the day at his final bachelor party, a quiet dinner with college friends, Maya dove deeper into Sarah's digital trail. Mrs. Rodriguez had agreed to keep David occupied and distracted giving Maya uninterrupted access to investigate. The woman who was planning to destroy their family. The police report database was Maya's most dangerous hack yet, but her amateur cybersecurity skills had grown sophisticated through years of necessity. Foster children learned early to research the adults who claimed to care for them, and Maya had developed methods that would impress professional investigators. Sarah Martinez's criminal history read like a masterclass in psychological manipulation and financial fraud. Born in Phoenix to a middle-class family that had reported her missing when she was 19, not because she'd been kidnapped, but because she'd vanished after systematically draining their bank accounts and stealing her mother's identity. Pattern had started small: credit card fraud, identity theft, romance scams conducted online. But Sarah had evolved, becoming more sophisticated with each victim. She'd learned to target men in specific emotional states: recently divorced, recently widowed, or struggling with family trauma. Men who were vulnerable but wealthy, isolated but desperate for connection. Maya found police reports from 4 different states. James Harrison in Colorado, a software engineer whose wife had died in a climbing accident. Sarah had met him at a grief support group, offered comfort and understanding, married him within 8 months, and disappeared with his life savings and the proceeds from selling his home. He'd found her bank accounts emptied and her identity completely fabricated on what was supposed to be their 6-month anniversary. Robert Chu, no relation to David, despite the shared surname in Oregon. A restaurateur whose teenage daughter had died in a car accident. Sarah had approached him as a customer, gradually became a friend, then a lover, then a wife. She'd convinced him to expand his business with loans secured against his properties, then systematically transferred the funds to offshore accounts before filing for divorce and claiming half his assets as community property. Michael Torres in Nevada, a construction company owner, trying to rebuild his relationship with his estranged son. Sarah had positioned herself as a family counselor, offering to help mediate their relationship while simultaneously manipulating both father and son. When she vanished, she'd taken not only Michael's savings, but also the college fund he'd been rebuilding for his boy. Each case showed the same hallmarks: extensive research, emotional manipulation targeting specific vulnerabilities, rapid escalation to marriage, and systematic financial destruction. But what chilled Maya most was the psychological damage Sarah left behind. James Harrison had attempted suicide. Robert Chun had never recovered emotionally, dying alone 3 years later. Michael Torres had lost his relationship with his son permanently. The betrayal and financial devastation destroying the family bonds they'd been trying to repair. The most recent case was Thomas Mitchell in California. Just 8 months ago, a tech executive with a teenage foster son. The parallel to David and Maya was terrifying in its precision. Sarah had vanished when the police began investigating financial irregularities in Thomas's company, but not before she'd managed to steal over $2 million and destroy his business relationships. Maya stared at Thomas Mitchell's police statement, her blood running cold as she read his description of Sarah's methods. The woman had studied his foster son's behavioral patterns, used the boy's trauma history to manipulate both father and child, created elaborate scenarios to test their trust and loyalty. When she'd finally been exposed, she'd attempted to turn father and son against each other, claiming the teenager was mentally unstable and dangerous. Thomas Mitchell's foster son had been removed from his care during the investigation. They'd never been reunited. Maya realized with crystal clarity that she wasn't just fighting for David's money or even his emotional well-being. She was fighting for their family's survival. If Sarah succeeded, Maya would lose not only her home, but David himself, and this time there might not be another chance for either of them. David returned from his bachelor dinner glowing with happiness, his arms full of wedding gifts from friends who were excited to see him moving forward after years of grief. Maya watched him set down a bottle of champagne and a handwritten card from his college roommate, her heart breaking at his innocent joy. Sarah texted, David said, settling onto the couch beside Maya. She's having trouble sleeping too. Pre-wedding nerves, she says. He laughed softly. I told her tomorrow. Can't come fast enough. Maya had planned this conversation carefully, rehearsing approaches with Mrs. Rodriguez. Start small, she decided. Plant seeds of doubt rather than dropping bombshells. Let David discover the inconsistencies himself. Dad, she began carefully, using the title that still felt precious and fragile between them. Can I ask you something about Sarah's family? Of course, sweetheart. She said her parents died when she was in college, right? In a car accident? David nodded, his expression growing somber. It's why she understands loss the way she does. She knows what it's like to have your world turn upside down. Maya pulled out her phone, displaying a web page she'd bookmarked. I was doing research for my psychology class about grief patterns, and I found this obituary. Look at the date and the details. David took the phone, his brow furrowing as he read. The obituary was from Margaret and William Morrison, killed in a car accident in Nebraska 5 years ago. But the details were wrong. They'd had 3 children, not one, and their daughter Sarah was listed as surviving them along with her 2 brothers. This ... this must be a different family, David said slowly. Same names, but, Dad, look at the photo. The image was small and grainy, but clear enough to see Margaret Morrison holding a young girl who looked nothing like the woman David was marrying. I don't understand, David said, but Maya could see the first cracks forming in his certainty. What about her Stanford degree? Did you ever see the actual diploma? David's hands were shaking slightly as he handed back the phone. Maya, what are you trying to say? I'm saying maybe we don't know her as well as we think we do. But David was already shutting down, his face closing off in the way it did when social workers used to question his qualifications as a foster parent. Sarah has been nothing but loving to both of us. She's helped you with your homework. She listens to your problems. She's never been anything but patient and kind. Maya felt tears burning her eyes. Dad, please just no. David stood up abruptly. I know you're scared about things changing. I know this is hard for you. But Sarah isn't trying to replace your place in this family. She wants to expand it. In Sarah's room, hidden in a jewelry box, Maya had found the love letters Sarah had written to David. Manipulative messages crafted to exploit his insecurities. About single parenthood, his guilt about his late wife's death, his desperate desire to give Maya a complete family. Every word calculated to bind him more tightly to her fabricated persona. Maya, David said gently, sitting back down. Tomorrow, I'm marrying the woman I love. I need you to trust me on this. Maya looked into his hopeful eyes and realized that love wasn't just blind. Sometimes it was willfully, desperately deaf to truth. The next morning, 18 hours before the wedding, Maya made her most disturbing discovery yet. While David was at the venue doing final walkthroughs, she accessed his business computer using the passwords she'd observed him type hundreds of times. David's cybersecurity firm, Shun Digital Solutions, was more successful than Maya had realized. Government contracts, corporate clients, proprietary software that he'd developed over 15 years of meticulous work. The company wasn't just profitable, it was potentially worth millions to someone who could gain control of its assets. And client base. The forged business partnership documents were masterfully crafted. Sarah, or someone working with her, had created a complex web of legal instruments that would activate immediately upon her marriage to David. A post-nuptial agreement disguised as a romantic gesture, giving her significant ownership stakes in the company as a symbol of their unity and shared future. Maya understood enough about business law to recognize the trap. The documents established Sarah as an equal partner in major business decisions, gave her access to company bank accounts, and most devastatingly, created a mechanism for her to force the sale of company assets if she could, demonstrate irreconcilable differences in their business vision. It was a hostile takeover, disguised as a love story. The timeline was precise and ruthless. Phase 1, marriage establishes legal authority. Phase 2, implementation of partnership agreements during honeymoon period. Wallaha. David is emotionally vulnerable and distracted. Phase 3, strategic business decisions that would transfer key assets to shell companies. Phase 4, engineered conflict leading to forced sale of remaining assets. Phase 5, disappearance. Maya found evidence that Sarah had already been in contact with David's biggest competitor, Hartwell Security Systems. Preliminary negotiations for purchasing Shun Digital Solutions client contracts and proprietary software, with Sarah positioned as the seller, despite having no legitimate claim to the business. But the most chilling discovery was the involvement of Marcus Webb, listed in Sarah's files as her business partner and scheduled to attend the wedding as her cousin from out of town. Maya cross-referenced his name with the police reports she'd found and felt her stomach drop. Marcus had been present at each of Sarah's previous operations, sometimes as a family member, sometimes as a romantic rival designed to create jealousy and emotional manipulation, always as a carefully placed accomplice. Marcus Webb was a financial predator with his own criminal history: money laundering, investment fraud, identity theft. He specialized in creating the shell companies and offshore accounts that made Sarah's thefts virtually untraceable. Together, they formed a sophisticated criminal partnership that had been operating for at least 6 years. Maya realized that the wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a business transaction. Every guest list Sarah had requested, every vendor she'd suggested, every detail she'd insisted on controlling was part of an elaborate setup. The photographer was probably documenting the signing of legal documents. The officiant was likely someone who specialized in ceremonies that created maximum legal vulnerability for the target. Even the honeymoon destination, a remote resort in the Cayman Islands, was chosen for its proximity to offshore banking facilities. David's prenuptial agreement, which he'd proudly shown Maya as evidence of their mutual trust, was actually a document that provided Sarah with far more protection and access than it gave him. The language was dense and technical, filled with loopholes that David's romantic optimism had prevented him from questioning. Maya stared at the computer screen, seeing her foster father's life's work laid out like prey before sophisticated predators. David had built something meaningful and valuable, and Sarah was planning to strip it down to nothing, leaving him financially and emotionally destroyed. Tomorrow's wedding wasn't a beginning. It was an execution scheduled for maximum efficiency and minimum resistance, and Maya was the only person who could stop it. Maya's hands shook as she set up the recording equipment. Her laptop, positioned strategically in David's home office, was connected to multiple devices she'd assembled using techniques learned from online cybersecurity forums. If Sarah was going to destroy their family, Maya would ensure there was evidence of exactly how she planned to do it. The burner phone had been the key discovery. Hidden in Sarah's purse behind tampons and breath mints, it contained a completely separate communication network that the woman David was marrying had maintained throughout their entire relationship. Maya had managed to clone the device using skills that would have impressed her foster father if he'd known she possessed them. The recorded conversations were damning beyond Maya's worst fears. Sarah's voice, stripped of all warmth and affection, discussing David and Maya like livestock being prepared for slaughter. The kid's more observant than I initially calculated. Sarah's voice crackled through Maya's headphones. But she's desperate for family stability. I can use that if she becomes a problem. Marcus Webb's response was equally chilling. What about the adoption records? Can we use them for leverage? Already copied. If the girl tries to interfere, we'll suggest she's having behavioral issues related to her trauma history. David's so guilty about her past that he'll believe she's acting out, might even voluntarily surrender custody to get her help. Maya had to pause the recording, her vision blurring with rage and terror. They weren't just planning to steal David's money, they were planning to eliminate her from his life entirely, using her own painful history as a weapon against the man who'd saved her. The conversations revealed the full scope of their operation. Marcus had been cultivating relationships with David's business associates for months, positioning himself as a potential investor while secretly gathering intelligence about company vulnerabilities. Sarah had been systematically documenting every aspect of David's personal and professional life, creating detailed files that would enable them to impersonate his identity and access his accounts after the marriage. But the most devastating recording was from just 2 days ago. Target exhibits classic symptoms of emotional dependency, Sarah reported with clinical detachment. Recent trauma, isolated social network, pathological need to create stable family unit. The foster child complicates the dynamic, but also provides additional leverage. He'll sacrifice anything to protect her, including his own financial security. Timeline still viable for asset liquidation? Absolutely. The prenup gives me immediate access to business accounts. I can begin transferring funds during the honeymoon period while he's emotionally compromised. By the time he realizes what's happening, the money will be gone, and the marriage will be too legally complicated to dissolve quickly. Maya felt sick listening to their casual discussion of destroying the only family she'd ever known. David wasn't a person to them. He was a mark, a target, a source of income to be exploited and discarded. The final recording was the most recent, from last night. What if she tries to warn him? A traumatized foster kid with trust issues making wild accusations against his new wife? Marcus, please. I've spent 6 months establishing myself as the stable, nurturing presence in their lives. Who do you think he'll believe? The woman who's shown him nothing but love? Or a damaged teenager having an obvious psychological breakdown? Maya saved every recording to multiple encrypted drives, her jaw set with determination. Sarah had underestimated her again. Tomorrow, the world would see exactly who was having a breakdown. Maya found Sarah in the bridal suite at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The bride was alone, applying makeup with the precision of someone preparing for a performance rather than a celebration. Her wedding dress hung nearby like a costume waiting for an actress. "Maya, sweetheart," Sarah said without turning around, her reflection meeting Maya's eyes in the vanity mirror. "You're up early. Nervous about the big day? We need to talk." Sarah's hand paused for just a moment before continuing to apply mascara. "Of course. I was hoping we'd have a chance to connect before the ceremony. I know this is a big change for all of us." Maya closed the door behind her and activated the recording app on her phone. "I know who you really are." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Sarah's warm, nurturing expression melted away like makeup in rain, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. She set down her mascara brush and turned to face Maya fully, no longer bothering to maintain her carefully constructed persona. "Do you now?" Sarah's voice had changed too, losing its gentle modulation and becoming sharp, predatory. "And what exactly do you think you know?" Sarah Martinez, born in Phoenix, wanted for fraud in 4 states, previously married to James Harrison, Robert Chun, Michael Torres, and Thomas Mitchell, all of them financially destroyed, one of them dead. Sarah smiled, and Maya understood for the first time what people meant when they described someone as having a shark's smile. "Very good. I'm impressed, actually. Most people never dig that deep. The police reports, the financial records, the business partnership documents. I have copies of everything." "Of course you do." Sarah stood up, smoothing her silk robe. "Tell me, Maya, and I am curious about this. What exactly did you think would happen when you came here this morning? Did you imagine I'd break down and confess, beg for mercy, promise to leave David alone?" Maya's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "I thought you should know that I'm going to stop you." Sarah laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "With what? Accusations from a traumatized foster child with documented trust issues? Do you have any idea how easy it would be to paint you as mentally unstable? A damaged girl having a psychotic break, making wild claims about the woman who's trying to give her a stable family? I have recordings of me talking to Marcus about wedding planning, of us discussing our concerns about your behavioral patterns, of us worrying about how to help you adjust to our marriage." Sarah moved closer, her presence somehow filling the room with menace. "Maya, sweetheart, I've been planning this conversation for months. Every recording you think you have can be explained. Every document you've found can be dismissed as misunderstood business transactions." Maya felt the walls closing in, but forced herself to stand her ground. "David will believe me, will he?" Sarah's voice took on a mock sympathetic tone. "Poor David, so desperate to create a perfect family that he'll ignore obvious red flags. Do you know how many conversations we've had about your concerning behaviors? Your secretiveness, your hacking skills, your obvious emotional instability? You've been manipulating him. I've been preparing him. When you make your dramatic accusations today, and we both know you will, he'll see them as confirmation of everything I've been gently suggesting about your mental state. The paranoia, the conspiracy theories, the inability to trust the people who love you." Sarah pulled out her own phone, showing Maya a series of text messages. "See these? Months of careful documentation about your episodes, your late-night computer use, your suspicious questions, your resistance to our relationship. David already knows you're struggling, sweetheart. When you try to destroy his wedding day with wild stories, it'll just prove that you need professional help." Maya realized with growing horror that she'd walked into a trap more sophisticated than she'd imagined. Maya fled the bridal suite with her phone clutched in trembling hands, Sarah's laughter echoing behind her like a death knell. She found Mrs. Rodriguez in the hotel kitchen, supervising the catering staff with her usual quiet authority. The older woman took one look at Maya's face and immediately guided her to a quiet corner. "Mia, what happened?" Maya's words tumbled out in a rush. The confrontation, Sarah's threats, the sophisticated psychological manipulation that had been building for months. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interruption, her weathered hands steady on Maya's shoulders as the teenager fought back tears of rage and fear. "She's been setting me up," Maya whispered. "David already thinks I'm unstable. She's been planting seeds for months, making him doubt my mental state. When I try to expose her, he'll think I'm having a breakdown." Mrs. Rodriguez reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something that made Maya's breath catch. David's late wife's wedding ring, the simple gold band he'd worn on a chain around his neck until he'd met Sarah. "He gave this to her last night," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. "Asked me to make sure it reached Sarah before the ceremony, a symbol of bringing his past love into his new beginning." Maya stared at the ring, understanding the cruel irony. Sarah was wearing a dead woman's jewelry while planning to destroy everything that woman had cherished: her husband's happiness, their business, their family. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what if we can't stop her? What if David doesn't believe us?" The older woman's eyes hardened with protective fury. "Then we make sure everyone else does." "Mia, you have the truth. That's a powerful weapon, even against someone like her." Mrs. Rodriguez had been quietly conducting her own investigation, Maya learned. 3 months ago, she'd noticed Sarah going through David's mail when she thought no one was watching. 2 months ago, she'd caught Sarah photographing important documents in David's office. Last month, she'd overheard Sarah on the phone speaking Spanish, not the careful textbook Spanish she claimed to have learned in college, but the fluent, native Spanish of someone who'd grown up bilingual. "I've been writing it all down," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pulling a small notebook from her other pocket. Every inconsistency, every suspicious behavior, every time her story changed. "I didn't want to worry Mr. David without proof, but I knew something was wrong." The notebook contained months of careful observations. Sarah claiming allergies to foods she'd previously eaten without problem. Stories about her childhood that contradicted each other. Phone calls conducted in hushed tones and multiple languages. Visitors who came to the house when David wasn't home. "She made one mistake," Mrs. Rodriguez said grimly. "She underestimated the people who really love this family. She thought she could isolate Mr. David from everyone who cares about him. But she forgot about us." Maya felt a surge of hope. Sarah had been playing a game of psychological manipulation, but she'd been playing it against 2 opponents instead of 1. Maya had the technical evidence. Mrs. Rodriguez had the behavioral observations, and together they had something Sarah couldn't fabricate or explain away: genuine love for David and determination to protect their family. "What do we do?" Maya asked. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "We give her exactly what she's not expecting: the truth, delivered by people who refuse to be silenced." The wedding guest registry lay open on the marble table in the hotel lobby, filled with names that Maya now recognized as a carefully curated collection of accomplices and unwitting enablers. She'd spent the morning analyzing the list with Mrs. Rodriguez, identifying the legitimate guests among Sarah's criminal associates. Marcus Webb had checked in as Mark Morrison, cousin of the bride, bringing with him 3 other family members whose names matched shell company executives Maya had found in Sarah's financial records. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here to witness the legal transfer of David's assets and ensure the operation proceeded smoothly. Maya watched David getting ready in his suite, her heart breaking as he hummed wedding songs while adjusting his tie. He looked younger somehow, hopeful in a way she hadn't seen since before his first wife died. In a few hours, she would have to destroy that hope to save him. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," David said, noticing Maya in her bridesmaid dress. Sarah had insisted on including Maya in the wedding party, another calculated gesture designed to demonstrate her acceptance of their family dynamic. Now Maya understood it was also a way to keep her visible and controlled during the ceremony. "Dad," Maya tried one last time, "are you absolutely sure about this?" David's face softened with the patient expression he used when he thought she was being overprotective. "Maya, I know you're worried about things changing between us, but Sarah loves you too. She wants to be part of our family, not replace what we have." Maya bit back the truth that was burning in her throat. In Sarah's burner phone, she'd found text messages discussing Maya's potential removal from David's custody, plans to suggest residential therapy programs, strategies for convincing David that Maya's behavioral issues required professional intervention that would conveniently place her outside their home during the asset liquidation phase. Mrs. Rodriguez peered in the doorway, carrying the boutonniere that would complete David's wedding outfit. As she pinned it to his lapel, she met Maya's eyes in the mirror with a look of grim determination. "The guests are arriving," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, including some of Sarah's family members who seemed very interested in the house and business details. David didn't catch the warning in her tone, but Maya did. The criminal associates were already positioning themselves, probably planning to begin the psychological pressure campaign immediately after the ceremony. Maya imagined Marcus Webb offering condolences about David's obvious stress, while simultaneously suggesting business opportunities that would accelerate the asset transfer timeline. Through the window, Maya could see the wedding venue being prepared, white roses and fairy lights, exactly as Sarah had requested. A string quartet warming up near the altar, chairs arranged in perfect rows for guests who had no idea they were attending an elaborate heist disguised as a celebration. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Looking forward to our family photos, sweetheart. Make sure you smile. These pictures will be treasured forever." The message felt like a threat. Maya realized that Sarah was probably planning to use wedding photos as evidence of her legitimate relationship with David, documentation that would support her legal claims to his assets if anyone questioned the marriage's authenticity. In 90 minutes, Maya would either save her family or watch it be destroyed by the most sophisticated predator she'd ever encountered. Her hands were steady as she checked her phone one final time, ensuring all her evidence was properly backed up and accessible. The truth was ready. Now she just had to find the courage to speak it. The wedding ceremony unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance, every detail designed to create maximum legal vulnerability for David while appearing romantically traditional. Maya stood at the altar in her pale blue bridesmaid dress, watching Sarah deliver vows that she now knew were crafted by someone who specialized in emotional manipulation. "David," Sarah said, her voice trembling with fabricated emotion, "you and Maya have given me something I never thought I'd find: a family. I promise to love and protect both of you for the rest of my life." The guests murmured appreciatively, but Maya noticed how Sarah's eyes didn't quite meet David's during the most intimate moments. Instead, she seemed to be performing for the crowd, ensuring every gesture was visible and memorable. The photographer, supposedly a friend of Sarah's family, was documenting everything with unusual attention to the legal documents being signed. Maya had managed to get a closer look at the marriage certificate before the ceremony, and her worst fears were confirmed. The document contained pre-signed amendments that would automatically activate certain legal provisions after the marriage was finalized. Sarah had literally built trapdoors into their wedding paperwork. The officiant was someone Sarah had insisted on hiring, claiming he was a family friend who had presided over her parents' marriage. Maya had researched him that morning and discovered he specialized in destination weddings and complex family situations, a euphemism, she suspected, for ceremonies that created maximum legal confusion for subsequent asset disputes. David's vows were heartbreakingly genuine. He spoke about second chances, about building a family from love rather than biology, about the courage it took to trust again after loss. Maya could see tears in his eyes as he promised to love Sarah through whatever challenges life might bring. Sarah's response was perfectly calibrated, emotional enough to seem genuine, specific enough to demonstrate her supposed understanding of his history, but carefully worded to avoid any actual legal commitments that might complicate her future plans. Maya scanned the crowd during the ring exchange, noting how Marcus Webb and his associates were positioned strategically throughout the venue. They weren't just attending, they were monitoring, ensuring the ceremony proceeded without interference, and probably prepared to handle any Unexpected complications. The moment that made Maya's blood run cold came during the signing of the marriage certificate. Sarah's hand moved across the document with practiced efficiency, signing multiple pages that David barely glanced at in his emotional state. Maya recognized the speed and precision of someone who had done this many times before. "By the power vested in me by the state of California," the officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Maya felt the words like a physical blow. The legal trap had been sprung. Sarah now had the authority to make decisions about David's business, access his accounts, and initiate the asset transfer protocols Maya had discovered in the encrypted files. As David kissed his new wife, Maya caught a glimpse of Sarah's expression, not joy or love, but satisfaction. The look of a predator that had successfully cornered its prey. The photographer captured the moment from multiple angles, ensuring there would be extensive documentation of the marriage's apparent authenticity. Maya realized these photos would probably be used as evidence in whatever legal battles followed Sarah's eventual betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. David Chun." The applause was thunderous, but Maya felt like she was watching a funeral instead of a celebration. The David Chun who had walked down the aisle as a hopeful single father was gone, replaced by a married man whose new wife was already planning his financial destruction. As the wedding party moved toward the reception hall, Maya made her final decision. She had exactly one chance to save her family, and she was going to take it, regardless of the consequences. Maya positioned herself behind the towering wedding cake, her smartphone heavy in her hands with the weight of everything she'd discovered. The reception hall buzzed with conversation and laughter, champagne glasses catching the light from crystal chandeliers. It was the perfect setting for a romantic celebration, and the perfect backdrop for exposing the truth. David and Sarah sat at the head table, David's arm around his new wife's shoulders, as guests approached to offer congratulations. Maya watched Sarah's performance, noting how she touched David's face with calculated tenderness while scanning the room to ensure all her associates were in position. Mrs. Rodriguez caught Maya's eye from across the room and nodded slightly. She was ready to provide backup support when Maya made her move. The older woman had positioned herself near the sound system, prepared to ensure Maya's voice would carry throughout the hall. Maya's hands trembled as she opened the recording app on her phone. She had hours of evidence: Sarah's conversations with Marcus, the criminal background checks, the financial records showing the systematic destruction of previous victims. But more than that, she had something Sarah couldn't manipulate or explain away: the truth, spoken by someone who refused to be silenced. The moment came when David stood to give his toast, his face glowing with happiness as he prepared to thank everyone for sharing their special day. Maya knew this was her last chance. Once the reception ended and the legal marriage was fully consummated, Sarah's authority over David's assets would be virtually unshakable. "She's not who she says she is." The words cut through the celebration like a blade through silk. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the string quartet seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, their melody trailing into confused silence. Maya stepped forward from behind the wedding cake, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the hall. She could feel Sarah's eyes boring into her, but she kept her focus on David's face, watching as confusion and concern replaced joy. "Her name isn't Sarah Morrison," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's Sarah Martinez, and this isn't her first wedding." The gasps from the crowd were audible now, but Maya pushed forward, knowing she had seconds before Sarah regained control of the situation. "I have proof." Sarah's reaction was immediate and perfectly calculated. Her face crumpled with apparent devastation, one hand flying to her chest, as if Maya's words were physical blows. "Maya, sweetheart, what are you saying?" "I don't understand." But Maya had learned to read Sarah's micro-expressions, and she could see the cold calculation behind the performance. This was what Sarah had prepared for, the moment she'd been planning to counter for months. "She's been planning this for months," Maya said, pulling out her phone. "The marriage, the business documents, everything. Dad, she's going to steal everything from you." David looked between Maya and Sarah with growing bewilderment, his wedding joy curdling into something painful and confused. "Maya?" I donned single quotes T. Sarah. "What is she talking about?" Sarah's tears were perfectly timed, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. "David, I'm so sorry. I've been worried about this for weeks. Maya's been acting so strangely, asking such concerning questions. I think ... I think she might be having some kind of episode." The crowd murmured uncertainly, and Maya realized the battle was just beginning. Maya pulled up the first recording on her phone, her hands steady, despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "This is Sarah talking to her accomplice Marcus Webb yesterday. She calls you the target." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone speakers with clinical detachment. "Target exhibits classic symptoms of emotional dependency. Recent trauma, isolated social network, pathological need to create stable family unit. The foster child complicates the dynamic, but also provides additional leverage." The effect on the crowd was immediate and electric. Gasps of shock, murmurs of disbelief, chairs scraping as people leaned forward to hear better. Maya watched David's face transform from confusion to horror as he heard the woman he'd just married discussing him like a laboratory specimen. That's not ... Sarah stammered, but Maya was already playing the next recording. "Timeline still viable for asset liquidation?" Marcus's voice asked. "Absolutely. The prenup gives me immediate access to business accounts. I can begin transferring funds during the honeymoon period while he's emotionally compromised." David's face had gone completely white. "Sarah, tell me this isn't real. Tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." But Sarah's mask was finally slipping. Maya could see the predator underneath fighting to regain control, calculating new strategies, even as her carefully constructed persona crumbled. "David, you can't possibly believe. There's more," Maya interrupted, switching to her laptop. "Financial records showing money already being transferred from your accounts. Dad, business partnership documents that give her control of your company. Police reports from 4 different states showing a real criminal history." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, her notebook in hand. "I've been documenting suspicious behavior for months," she announced in her clear, authoritative voice. "Phone calls in multiple languages, visitors who came when Mr. David wasn't home, stories about her background that changed every time she told them." Maya projected the police reports onto the wall screen that had been set up for wedding photos. James Harrison's case in Colorado, Robert Chun in Oregon, Michael Torres in Nevada, Thomas Mitchell in California. Each file showed the same pattern: romantic manipulation, rapid marriage, systematic asset theft, devastating abandonment. James Harrison attempted suicide after she disappeared with his life savings, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. Robert Chun died alone 3 years later, never recovering from the emotional devastation. Thomas Mitchell lost custody of his foster son and his business. The crowd was murmuring now, some guests starting to move away from Sarah as if her deception might be contagious. Maya noticed several of Marcus's associates edging toward the exits, their cover blown. David stood slowly, his legs unsteady as the full scope of Sarah's betrayal became clear. "The pre-NUP ... the business documents I signed ... all designed to give her immediate access to your assets," Maya confirmed. "She's been planning this for 7 months, Dad. Every moment of your relationship has been calculated." Sarah made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "David, please. You know me. You know how much I love you. Love Maya. This is obviously some kind of elaborate manipulation." "Stop." David's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. "Just ... to stop." Maya watched her foster father's heart break in real time, his dreams of family and love crashing against the reality of sophisticated predation. But she also saw something else in his eyes: recognition. The moment when he finally saw Sarah clearly, without the filter of hope and longing that had blinded him for months. Marcus Webb was moving through the crowd now, probably trying to reach Sarah for damage control. But Mrs. Rodriguez had already signaled hotel security, who were quietly positioning themselves near the exits. Maya pulled up her final piece of evidence: the modified marriage certificate with its pre-signed amendments, the legal trap that would have given Sarah unprecedented control over David's life. The transformation was complete and terrifying. Sarah's carefully constructed persona evaporated like morning mist, revealing the cold predator underneath. Her tears stopped instantly, replaced by a calculating stare that made several guests step backward instinctively. "You stupid little girl," Sarah hissed at Maya, all pretense of maternal affection gone. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Maya felt a chill of fear, but stood her ground. This was the real Sarah Martinez, the woman who had destroyed 4 families before targeting theirs. "I saved my family." Sarah laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made the wedding guests shift uncomfortably. "Your family? You're a foster kid with abandonment issues and a history of behavioral problems. David will come to his senses and realize you're having a psychotic break." "Sarah, please," David said quietly, his voice hollow with betrayal. "Don't make this worse." "Worse?" Sarah spun toward him, her wedding dress swirling like a costume she was ready to discard. "David, you weak, pathetic man. Do you think any of this was real? The late-night conversations about your dead wife? The patient interest in your broken little foster daughter? The romantic gestures and future planning?" Maya watched David flinch, as if he'd been slapped, but Sarah wasn't finished. "I studied you for months before our chance meeting at that coffee shop. Your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your desperate need for someone to validate your fantasy of being a good father. You were so easy to manipulate. It was almost boring." Hotel security had arrived now, positioning themselves discreetly around the room as Mrs. Rodriguez guided them toward the key players. Maya noticed Marcus Webb trying to blend into the crowd, but his associates were being quietly surrounded. Sarah seemed to realize her escape routes were being cut off, and her voice took on a desperate edge. "You want to know the truth about your precious family? I have Maya's complete psychological profile. Years of documented trauma, trust issues, behavioral problems that David's been hiding from social services. One phone call from me, and she be removed from his custody permanently." Maya felt her stomach drop, but David stepped forward with surprising strength. "You're done threatening my daughter." "Your daughter?" Sarah's laugh was genuinely amused now. "She's not your daughter, David. She's a damaged child you took in to make yourself feel better about your wife's death. And when this marriage gets annulled, which it will, considering the fraud involved, you'll be left with nothing but a teenager who destroyed your chance at happiness." Maya realized that Sarah was still playing psychological games, trying to drive a wedge between her and David, even as her elaborate con fell apart. The woman was a master manipulator, right until the end. "Officers," Mrs. Rodriguez called to the hotel security team. "This woman is wanted for fraud in multiple states. We have evidence of ongoing criminal activity." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, calculating escape routes that no longer existed. Maya could see her mind working frantically, probably planning her next manipulation. How to spin this disaster into someone else's fault. How to maintain some advantage, even in defeat. In her purse, Maya knew, was the emergency suitcase Sarah had packed weeks ago. Cash, fake identification documents, and detailed plans for disappearing if the operation went wrong. The woman had prepared for every contingency except one, being exposed by a traumatized teenager who refused to be silenced. The police arrived within minutes, their professional efficiency a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of the collapsed wedding. Maya watched as they placed Sarah and Marcus Webb in handcuffs, along with 3 other wedding guests who turned out to be accomplices in the elaborate fraud scheme. Detective Martinez, no relation to Sarah. Despite the shared surname, listened patiently as Maya presented her evidence. The encrypted files, recorded conversations, police reports from other states, and financial records painted a clear picture of sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. "You did excellent investigative work," Detective Martinez told Maya quietly. "This level of evidence will help us build cases against the entire network." Sarah maintained her composure even in handcuffs, her eyes still calculating as she was. Led away. "This isn't over," she called to David. "The marriage is legal. I have rights to community property. You'll spend years in court trying to undo what we've accomplished." But Maya had anticipated this final manipulation. "Actually, you don't," she said, holding up her phone. "I recorded you confessing that the marriage was fraudulent, that every aspect of your relationship was calculated deception. That recording invalidates any legal claims you might have." For the first time, Sarah's composure cracked completely, her face contorted with rage as she realized that her own arrogance had provided the evidence. needed to destroy her legal position. David sat heavily in one of the wedding chairs, still wearing his tuxedo, but looking years older than he had that morning. The betrayal trauma was written across his face, the crushing realization that everything he'd believed about love and trust had been expertly manipulated. "Dad," Maya said softly, approaching him carefully. "I'm sorry I had to destroy your wedding day." David looked up at her with eyes that were haunted but clear. "Maya, you saved my life. You saved our family. I'm the one who should be apologizing for not listening to you, for being so blind to what was happening." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared beside them with 2 cups of coffee and a wisdom born of decades. "Mr. David, men who have good hearts often can't see evil in others. It's not a weakness. It's why people like Maya and me fight so hard to protect you." The wedding venue is being cleared now, the fairy lights and white roses looking absurd in the aftermath of the criminal investigation. Maya realized she was still wearing her bridesmaid dress, a costume for a celebration that had become an exposure of sophisticated predation. "What happens now?" David asked, his voice hollow. Detective Martinez overheard and approached their small group. "The evidence Miss Chan provided gives us everything we need to build federal cases. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes across state lines. Sarah Martinez and her associates are facing significant prison time." Maya looked at the police evidence bag containing Sarah's burner phone, fake identification, documents, and detailed criminal playbook. Everything that had threatened to destroy their family was now being cataloged as evidence in a case that would protect future victims. Their wedding day had become a crime scene, but their family was finally safe. 6 weeks later, Maya found David in his home office, staring at his computer screen with the same haunted expression he'd worn since the wedding disaster. The financial damage assessment was finally complete, and while Sarah hadn't managed to steal everything she'd planned, the attempted theft had left scars that went deeper than money. "The lawyers say we'll recover most of the transferred funds," David said without looking up. "The marriage annulment went through yesterday. Legally, it's like none of it ever happened." Maya sat down across from him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the weight he'd lost since discovering the truth about Sarah's deception. "But it did happen, didn't it?" David finally met her eyes, and Maya saw the depth of his emotional trauma. "I keep questioning everything, Maya. My judgment, my ability to protect our family. Whether I'm even qualified to be your father if I can be fooled so completely." It was the conversation Maya had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. David's confidence had been shattered by Sarah's manipulation, leaving him doubting not just his romantic judgment, but his entire sense of self. "Dad," Maya said carefully, "what Sarah did to you wasn't your fault. She's a professional predator who spent months studying your vulnerabilities and crafting the perfect deception. You're not weak for believing someone you loved, but you saw through her. A 16-year-old girl saw what a 40-year-old man missed completely." Maya pulled out the family photo Mrs. Rodriguez had taken of them last Christmas. David and Maya decorating their tree while Mrs. Rodriguez supervised from the kitchen. It was one of Maya's most treasured possessions, proof that love could create family bonds stronger than biology. "I saw through her because of what you taught me," Maya said. "You gave me a safe place to learn to trust my instincts again. You showed me that adults could keep their promises and protect the people they love. I had those skills because you helped me develop them." David's expression softened slightly, but Maya could see he was still struggling with guilt and self-doubt. "Besides," Maya continued, "I had advantages Sarah didn't account for. My trauma history made me hypersensitive to manipulation tactics. My technical skills let me investigate her background, and I had Mrs. Rodriguez watching out for all of us." As if summoned by her name, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with a tray of sandwiches and her usual no-nonsense wisdom. "Mr. David, you've been hiding in this office for weeks feeling sorry for yourself. That woman tried to destroy our family and failed. Now you're doing her job for her." David actually smiled for the first time since the wedding, a small, fragile expression, but genuine. "Elena, you never pull any punches, do you? When people I love are hurting themselves, no." Mrs. Rodriguez set down the tray and fixed David with her steady gaze. "That woman studied you for months to find your weaknesses. But she never understood. Your greatest strength, the family you built with love instead of blood. Maya felt tears burning her eyes as she looked at these two people who had become her anchor in an uncertain world. David had given her stability and unconditional love. Mrs. Rodriguez had provided wisdom and fierce protection. Together, they had created something Sarah's calculations had never been able to account for. A chosen family bound by genuine affection and mutual commitment to each other's well-being. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Maya sat at her desk working on college application essays while David reviewed security protocols for his rebuilt business. The house felt different now, not because of what they'd lost, but because of what they'd gained through surviving Sarah's deception together. Maya's essay prompt stared back at her from the laptop screen. Describe a time when you found your voice and used it to make a difference. She began typing. I learned that the quietest voices sometimes carry the most important truths when I stood up at my foster father's wedding and said 5 words that saved our family. She's not who she says she is. David's cybersecurity firm had not only recovered from Sarah's attempted theft, but had grown stronger. The experience of being targeted by sophisticated criminals had given him insights into corporate vulnerability that made his services even more valuable to clients. He'd hired a new business partner, carefully vetted this time, and implemented security protocols that would make future fraud attempts virtually impossible. Maya had testified in federal court against Sarah Martinez and her criminal network, helping to secure convictions that would protect countless future victims. The prosecutor had called her one of the most effective witnesses he'd ever worked with, praise that still made Maya glow with pride. That Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on Maya's door, carrying a cup of tea and wearing the satisfied expression she got when family business was proceeding according to her plans. Your father wants to speak with you downstairs, Mia. Maya found David in the living room with a manila envelope and an expression that mixed nervousness with excitement. Maya, we've never made this official, but I was wondering, would you like me to formally adopt you? Make our family legal as well as real? Maya felt her breath catch. She dreamed of this moment, but had never dared ask, afraid that David might see legal adoption as too much commitment or responsibility. Really? You want to adopt me officially? I've wanted to for years, David admitted, but I was afraid to push. Afraid you might feel pressured or trapped. After everything we've been through, I realized that family isn't just about love. It's about making promises you intend to keep, no matter what challenges arise. Maya launched herself into David's arms, tears streaming down her face as Mrs. Rodriguez watched from the doorway with obvious satisfaction. Yes, Maya whispered. Yes, I want to be officially part of this family. 3 months later, Maya Shin Rodriguez walked across the stage at her high school graduation. Headed to MIT on a cybersecurity scholarship she'd earned through her investigative work on Sarah's case. David Chun sat in the audience next to Elena Rodriguez, who had agreed to let them add her name to Maya's officially when the adoption was finalized. As Maya accepted her diploma, she caught sight of a news article on her phone. Teen hero helps convict criminal network, saves multiple families from financial fraud. She smiled and put the phone away. Some stories were more important than headlines. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that families are built with love, trust, and the courage to speak truth, even when that truth is hard to hear.